you look at what's happened over the last 5 years, 5 years is actually a really long time. But some of the macro things I think are in 5 years, looking at the gig and contingent workforce and the expansion of that, and just the rise of kind of non-traditional work arrangements, I would see as probably continuing, and how then companies establish an infrastructure to manage that. I do think that off the back of that, HR being truly strategic partners and looking at organizational culture and change management will be a big thing over the next 5 years.
Welcome to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am Trent Cotton, your host and human capitalist. Ask yourself, is your HR organization future-proof? Well, we are going to dig into that very topic in this episode. In this podcast, we are going to tackle all of the topics that keep business owners and HR professionals up at night, from AI automation to transforming your workforce to meet the needs of the future. So, if you have employees, you're going to want to follow along and take a lot of notes. So with that, buckle up, get ready. It's time to dig into this episode and transform you into a human capitalist. Let's go. All right, welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am Trent Cotton, your host, and today I am joined by Mark, who is the CEO of Pillar HR. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Trent. Excited to be here, and thank you to all the listeners for joining me.
Well, and it's kind of funny because I think this is the first time that I've interviewed you. Usually I'm on the other side doing webinars and things like that with Pillar HR, so it's kind of weird with you being in the hot seat. I'm used to the one kind of under fire. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Pillar HR as well?
So yeah, I'm Mark Simpson. I'm the founder and CEO of Pillar. I have founded now 3 successful B2B SaaS companies in my career over the last 20 or so years, all of which have been focused on machine learning and AI. Pillar, most latterly, has really sort of applied that and put a focus on using AI, using machine learning in the interview process. So Pillar is an interview intelligence platform. And we do 2 really big things within the interview process. One is we give enterprises a platform to just very efficiently and very effectively plan out the process, affect sort of interviews in a standardized and consistent manner, gain feedback from those interviews, and take that right the way through to using data from those interviews in actually who you should hire. Who are the best candidates for the role? So there's a lot of work we do with enterprises across that sort of process part of just making interviews what they should always be. The second element of what we do is just providing a ton of efficiencies through the interview process, automating a bunch of tasks, giving people hours back in their day, allowing them to focus on more strategic elements, and providing real ROI back to companies in terms of quality of hire, hours back, and so on and so forth. So the interview is one of those processes that hasn't been really changed for the last 20 or so years, and with the new technologies that are out there and available now, there are sort of considerable benefits to taking a look at that very, very important part of hiring.
I cannot wait to dig into the technology aspect of that, but we'll save that for a little bit later. Now, you have a pretty interesting, unique fact that I think the audience would like. What's one thing that someone should know about you that's pretty unique?
Yeah, you asked me a little bit beforehand. Trent gave me this question before, and I was struggling to think actually on kind of like what was really unique. But I have travelled to and fairly sort of extensively travelled around 6 of the 7 continents in the world. The only one I haven't done is Antarctica. And it really started in my early 20s when I spent 4 or 5 months traveling when I had no money at all via public transport around Africa, or southern and eastern Africa, through South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, and Kenya, and had an amazing time. Traveling, worked on a water aid project and learnt to dive, and went on safari and all these different things. Had some amazing experiences, including some very exciting ones and other ones where I got held up by gunpoint, and all these elements.
Wow.
that kind of came into it. But it gave me the bug for traveling, and has been a big part of my life, and is a big part of my family's life as well now. So we absolutely love it. But I've been to every continent now apart from Antarctica, and traveled sort of fairly extensively in each.
Wow, that's very impressive. I'm going to have to, when we get off camera, I'm going to have to hear about the gunpoint story. that one sounds like there's a story there. I can't wait to hear it. All right, so on the podcast, what I like, having guests like you that are definitely in the HR but also in the technology space. I like to start with kind of casting a vision forward for HR, because I really believe that we are finally about to enter the golden age of HR as a result of AI, and there's going to be a lot of change and a lot of transformation as a result. So you work with a lot of companies, and you're also keeping a very keen eye on the future. In the world of human capital, how do you see it changing over the next 1, 5, and 10 years?
Yeah, very different over those timescales, and I'll try and keep this sort of more broad in the world of interview intelligence as well. I think so. Over the next year, obviously being the most predictable, but I think kind of like a stabilization in kind of hybrid work and what that means for companies, and how they're wrestling with that will just settle things down a little bit, and it will just allow sort of technology to play a key role in for different companies in how they operate. I think some of the big moves, I kind of focus on 3 other areas over the next year. One is just sort of a real sort of shift and focus to skills over roles. A lot of people talking about that at the moment, but actually an implementation of kind of skills over roles. And I think that is really sort of accelerating with AI. It's very fast moving change. And if you think about that and how that plays out, there's going to be real sort of needs to look at upskilling and reskilling programs, and to keep up with the developments, particularly across AI. I think over the next year, we're going to continue to see, and in an accelerated way, the integration of AI through all of our processes. I think people are getting their heads around AI this year, and understanding where some things can be applied, and those applications are going to broaden next year. And I think it will be the year where really sort of people start seeing like true benefits coming into their businesses of AI. And from that, I think, thirdly, over the next year, looking at data-driven decisions, just using more data in order to make decisions from an HR perspective across the business. So that sort of 1 year, I think, is sort of fairly easy to maybe envision. 5 years, if you look at what's happened over the last 5 years, 5 years is actually a really long time. But some of the macro things, I think, in 5 years, looking at the gig and contingent workforce and the expansion of that, and just the rise of kind of non-traditional work arrangements, I would see as probably continuing, and how then companies establish an infrastructure to manage that. I do think that off the back of that, HR being truly strategic partners and looking at organizational culture and change management will be a big thing over the next 5 years, as AI sort of really changes work. And then over the next 10 years, 10 years is the hardest question of that to answer, because so many things can happen. But if you look at over the next 10 years at the sort of really macro trends that are going to come out and play out through HR, I think, a true sort of human AI collaboration is going to change a lot. The seamless integration of AI within our lives, within human capital processes, within humans and work, and how that works. So if you look at then how that plays out, you've got to look at ethical governance frameworks for AI in the workplace, and establishing those, and looking at how you train yourself into that and play that out through maybe kind of that sort of more hyper-personalized career development and learning ecosystems tailored to you, and how to continuously learn and evolve with that sort of modular education. And The thing I hope is going to play out over the next 10 years is a reimagination of work-life balance. Because we all work a lot. We all work a lot more than we maybe have lives, or certainly I do. And with AI driving some of the changes that I've mentioned, I would love to see sort of the change in the skills in the workforce leading to a different sort of work-life balance as well. But that's maybe a pipe dream. We'll see how it goes.
It's funny that you said that, because I read something, I think, yesterday, where Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, was asked about what does the workforce look like in the future. And he said in the not too distant future, we'll be working 3.5 days because we'll have AI handling some of the mundane things that just occupy so much of our time. And if you think about HR, it is inundated with paperwork and processes and tracking and all of that. I'm kind of like you. I'm waiting for the day, and I'm already seeing it with just some of the AI tools that I use now. It's, I actually have time to think. I have time to develop a strategy. So on the governance side, I mean, you're neck deep in an AI machine learning company. And I know that you guys are global. Are you seeing parts of, like, maybe Europe is a little bit more stringent on the regulation than the US, or do you see things changing?
I'm very sort of pro AI governance, just to give us kind of a clear and a clear path forward in how we operate as businesses, both from a vendor landscape, but more importantly from our customers as well. And the more that we can settle on a coordinated sort of governance across AI, across different parts of the world and parts of the market, the better. What we're seeing at the moment is a fairly sort of fractured process, not just on a country level, but in the US even on a state level, as we go through this. So I think there's lots more work to do there, and I just see that those looking at sort of regulation around AI being way behind the AI curve right now, but and with a real need to catch up. I do think that there is the element outside of regulation, though, of just governments within organizations, and we see, most enterprises now setting up sort of AI councils and getting to grips around that. And as those sort of settle into more business as usual processes, I think that's going to be a very positive thing, just to get more definition and more certainty around how people want to use AI within their organizations. So I think part of it is regulation, and part of it is actually businesses getting their heads around making sure that they govern themselves in the right way in this new world that we're entering into.
Do you foresee, we always kind of think of, like, what's the new position? And one of the ones that I've been toying in my head with is, at least in my day job, one of the things that we run into is that a lot of organizations are like, yeah, we want to do AI, but no one really owns that in the organization. So then it becomes a turf war. Is that, technology, or is it the compliance officer, or is it the CFO, CAO? And it's just like no one really knows, because it's so new, no one really knows where to put that. Do you foresee one of the jobs being created in the new workforce is almost like I wouldn't say a chief AI officer, but almost within every business unit, someone who owns that AI and is like the AI manager of agents?
I think certainly where the workforce is at the moment, there needs to be people within probably every department that has some kind of skills and is there disseminating sort of the latest movements in AI and how that applies to within your part of your organization. I think that would be a very valuable role right now. As you sort of play it out, you sort of asked the 1, 5, and 10 years. I think that's kind of like the 1 year mark is making sure that there's expertise within each department and there's some coordination of that within organizations. As it plays out over the next sort of 5 years or 10 years, where AI is truly just a part of our lives, and kind of we have our heads around governance and the ethics of AI and the like. I think it's just going to be part of everybody's day-to-day work in some way or another. And yes, there may be a chief AI officer sort of controlling a little bit of kind of corporate direction of that, but I do think that that will will really be disseminated right the way through an organization, and having frameworks to operate within is important. But honestly, everyone is going to have to get their heads around, how they use AI in their work and how it augments them to be able to do to add more value in their roles.
That makes complete sense. So, with Pillar being an AI product, what are some of the biggest obstacles that, whenever you're speaking to a client or a prospect, what are some of the most common obstacles that you're hearing, and then how do you all overcome those?
Being very early days in AI, there's for us certainly we work a lot with some large enterprises. There's a fairly cautious approach. So the AI that we have within Pillar right now is way more advanced than some organizations are willing to accept. And let me give you maybe an example of that. So, there are simple uses of AI throughout interview intelligence and kind of the interview process. So, things that are more acceptable are things like using AI to remove bias from a job description, or take a job description, create interview guides, or summarize interviews into kind of write-ups and feedback after those. And that's actually kind of passes through sort of fairly easy, because it's very easy to get our heads around what we're doing, the use of that, and it doesn't kind of cross any kind of borders or barriers. There are also elements of AI which are harder for organizations to accept now. Things like we can, with AI, detect bias in interviews, and use that to train interviewers, use AI to train interviewers to run interviews without bias. Now, organizations are going to have to accept that there are some interviews with bias, and we are actually uncovering those as part of the process if you turn on that part of that part of Pillar, that area. Or maybe it's you, or another example is, we can understand with AI the candidate's experience within the interview. So we can actually sort of, truly understand sort of which interviewers maybe need more training to give candidates a better experience or not. And just uncovering weaknesses in a process which has quite a few weaknesses inherently in it, because it's been, a black box for so long, is harder for some enterprises to get their heads around because of legal kind of protection and fear of, being sued and having discoverable information and those elements. So we help a lot of organizations go through that, get their heads around it, and make progress. And maybe we start with a more simple side of things and then make progress into some of those more advanced elements of AI.
That is so on the bias piece. Like, how can technology acknowledge that the interviewer is showing bias? Like, that to me is fascinating, because whenever I do speaking or panels, one of the first questions inevitably is about bias. Am I not concerned about it? And I mean, my answer is I'm actually more concerned about the bias that's present in humans than the bias that may be manifested through AI, because I can at least retrain the AI. I can try to retrain the human, but it won't stick. So like, how does your technology flag and go, hey, we've got some bias here? That's fascinating.
Yeah, Trent, it's really interesting, isn't it, when we have AI that is trained, and yes, there are certain elements of AI that have bias within it, or is trained on data with bias, and it's very, very hard to remove that sort of nth degree of bias. But humans have just so much more with it biases within them than AI has, and that sort of argument and debate, I think, will rage for quite a while. Specifically within interviews, to answer your question, Trent. So we can understand if interviews are not consistent across interviews with different candidates. We can understand, AI will understand the conversation generally within an interview. So, very easy stuff like if someone is touching on a protected characteristic, that can be flagged as a potential moment of bias. But then it can actually get into quite quite sort of detailed understanding of the conversation. So, for example, in a 30-minute interview, did you spend 20 minutes talking about your favorite football team or where you went to school or where you lived or your dogs or whatever it is, and 5 minutes on the skills for the role, whereas it should be the other way around. We can understand the conversation to that degree and that level, and then just provide feedback and automated sort of training back to interviewers on how an interview should be run and where focus should be in the conversation. So we can understand where people veer away from talking about the skills for the role or the competencies you're supposed to be looking for and things like that, and just really help nudge interviewers in the right direction of being able to run those interviews that is truly going to understand who are the best candidates for the role based on their skills.
That's fascinating. I've got I use like a Read AI assistant that joins some meetings and stuff. So it takes all the notes and it does like a really good synopsis by providing chapters. But one time I had set up an interview, but I wasn't going to be on it. It was just me setting it up. But I got the readout at the end, and so the hiring manager gave feedback. I don't know that this is the right candidate, and it just had something at the top where it what you were talking about, who spoke the most, and it was 73% of the time was the hiring manager. And then so I went, my data brain was going, well, what actually happened? And whenever I got into it, to your point, it was like 10 minutes that the candidate had to sell themselves and use that data with the hiring manager and basically convince them to go back through the interview. And I sat in with it kind of as a coach. And believe it or not, they actually fell in love with the candidate. And I said, isn't it amazing what happens when you give the candidate more time to speak? But I never would have had any kind of insight into that without, a very rudimentary tool compared to what I know Pillar has. So what, I guess, kind of looking at where things are happening the most, because I imagine you have a ton of data on the back end. What are some of the insights that you're seeing as you're pulling back the curtain on how people interview?
Look, I think that's a really interesting example, something that we see all the time, Trent. I think where we started uncovering those things sort of 4 or 5 years ago when we first started building Pillar, we actually got a lot of feedback from recruiting talent acquisition teams. With a little bit of a fear of that as well, but fear more in the, oh my gosh, don't give me this information. I don't have time to even fill the roles I have. How do I have time to kind of correct all these problems I'm going to uncover in the hiring, in the interview process? So we've spent a lot of time actually over the last 4 or 5 years working hard to automate some of that feedback, some of that training back, so it doesn't all sit on the recruiter or the talent acquisition team's shoulders to be able to do that. And we use a lot of AI within the platform to try and highlight what is the biggest area of value for the user to do next. You can highlight sort of where your time is best spent, who are maybe the people who aren't responding to feedback, or the biggest areas of opportunity for training versus those that just do it well. You can automate some of that back too. So it's really interesting, not just sort of uncovering the problems, but actually with an area of the company that is so valuable but so time poor. How we actually sit alongside those users and help them, add more value in their jobs has been a very, very big focus for us over the last few years. Actually, so since sort of the feedback we got on uncovering what was wrong, the question is, how do we help people fix it the best way?
Wow. So what are some of the because you work with some really large companies, like what are you seeing from implementing this interview intelligence with your clients? Any fun success stories you want to sell?
Yeah, we're very, very fortunate to have some amazing customers at quite some scale now. Fortune 50 companies and the like. So there are some basics that we see in efficiencies. People that things that people can get their head around really easy. So every recruiter, just by helping them with interview planning, creating interview guides, doing write-ups from all the interviews that they do, the screenings that they do, we save every single individual somewhere in the region of 5 to 10 hours a week. So imagine, a quarter of your week almost being given back to you to do other things. That's actually a realistic sort of outcome in looking at applying interview intelligence into your interviews. But there's more than just kind of hours saved. We actually measure a ton of statistics to just look at the impact of interview intelligence into an area, again, that hasn't been touched for so long. So we're looking at over a 25% decrease in time to fill. We're looking at 90+% of scorecards being submitted within 24 or 48 hours for most companies. When they look at how to get data back from those interviews, we're looking at over 20% increase in acceptance rates, and over 30% decrease in 6-month attrition, which is like really kind of interesting when you get into that quality of hire and save some very big costs to individuals. We also look at a dramatic sort of increase in offers to diverse candidates in some companies, up to sort of 40% in some cases as well. So depending on the customer and the problems that they're trying to solve, we see some very big impacts. And we kind of when starting the company didn't know what to expect, but expected to see big value in places, because anywhere that's really been largely sort of a black box for so long, there's going to be dramatic effects in applying technology, and just so happy in the feedback that our customers are giving us about how important and strategic and thankful they are for having Pillar sitting alongside them now.
Well, I'm a data guy, so as you're sitting there rattling off all these things, I'm actually calculating the dollars. Those are hard dollars that you're able to prove just by implementing an AI product. But there was one piece or one stat that you said that I want to peel back a little bit more. The increase in DEI or diversity candidates. Why do you? I have my own idea of why that might be the case, but what's your explanation for that?
There's a few things that go into that. So if we kind of break it down into a couple of key areas, I think one is just the standardization of the interview process and the expectations that interviewers are held accountable now for asking a fairly sort of consistent or very consistent, fairly standardized set of questions to every candidate, just uncovers a candidate's skill set in a much clearer way. Whereas if you go back even 5 years ago, two people going into a room having a conversation, you didn't really know what happened, and one person is coming out the other side saying they like someone or not. You don't know whether there's consistency there. There's no accountability for that interview, and there's a lot of bias that can creep into that. So just the basics of having a well-structured process that is accountable, and if it's recorded, even more so, because you'll sort of know that there is going to be things uncovered if you don't run that interview in the right way. The second part of that is using data around hiring a candidate. So now if you're recording interviews, our AI just breaks questions around skills and the answer those skills up into highlight clips. And when you get into candidate selection meetings, those debrief meetings where the hiring manager can go into now any part of any of the interviews and just compare people's answers to skills back to back. So you're truly assessing someone on their skills, using data to make a hire, rather than, if you think about how those meetings used to be run in so many companies, it's people turning up, looking at 3-week-old notes with some bullet points and remembering if they liked a candidate. Now it's just replaying people talking about their skills back to back, and you can actually see who has the best skills for the role, rather than someone's opinion on what they remembered from an interview a few weeks back.
That's incredible insight there. And the tool, does it do any kind of, you mentioned earlier about candidate experience, is that like based on sentiment analysis, or how do you grade that aspect of the interview?
Yeah, exactly right, Trent. I'm very impressed. So we understand the conversation. AI can understand the conversation. It's actually candidate sentiment. You mentioned sort of the word sentiment. That's something that's used in in call centers, globally, it's been used for many years to, so when someone calls in, it tells the person on the other side whether that person is like angry or aggressive or happy or, what sort of sentiment they have coming in. We've adapted kind of some of the basics of that into the interview, so can understand as the conversation goes on how the candidate reacts to it, what their experience is around it, whether that whether their sentiment moves up or down, and how they're feeling about the conversation. So the practicalities of that is we see some interviewers, and it's funny, it can be some of the top performers in their job role running interviews that demotivate candidates and actually turn them off from progressing forward in the process. It's actually not uncommon. It's really not uncommon. But just with some tweaks and some training, that can change around very, very, very quickly. And it's just making sure you uncover some of these things which make talent acquisition teams' jobs harder, and can turn that into a much more positive sort of experience and make their jobs much easier. Is something that that looking at the candidate experience within the interview can do very easily.
Yeah, that's fascinating part of technology, because there was one tech that I was talking to, and they were actually able to judge soft skills with their AI tool, and of course my brain naturally started asking all kinds of questions, and they were able to measure like the inflection of the voice, the word count, and all of these different things. And this was amongst friends, and one of the friends was like, "Hey, I can't do that." And we just started talking. Whenever you're on the phone with someone, if you know them well enough and their voice changes, their mood changes, your brain's already making inferences. It's not a far stretch logically for AI to be able to do the same, is it?
You're absolutely right. I mean, humans do it naturally as part of a conversation. If you changed how you spoke to me now, Trent, I would know immediately that you're happy or sad or whatever it might be. Obviously, with AI, we've got to make sure that we adhere to kind of regulations. We're not measuring things like facial expression or tone of voice and those sorts of things. So AI is now very, very good and being trained on billions and billions of data points around being able to tell sort of the sentiment or the experience of the individual based on the words they use, the sentence structure, the words within that structure, how they talk. And from that, you have a very actually accurate inference around what the experience is that they're going through. So it's absolutely fascinating when you turn it on, and you turn it on for any conversation you have. It is truly fascinating how people's experience and people's impressions change as topics change going through a conversation, a half-hour conversation or whatever it might be. It's when we first sort of applied this, I was obsessed by it.
Oh, I would have been too. And I don't know that I could ever work for Pillar, because I would be all in the data. Like I would chase so many rabbits just because I'm fascinated by psychology, and then now the intersection of tech and that psychology is just something that is just it's I have to admit it's a little scary, but it's also incredibly fascinating.
Truly changing the game. Yeah.
It really is. It really is, and I love how. It sounds like the tool kind of started out as, hey, we're trying to solve the problem that interviews suck, which they do. But it sounds like you all have just really kind of created this whole suite of other products that I don't think anyone's thinking about that. Like how can AI save me time on the interview process? Yes, but how can it help me be able to help my clients, the hiring managers, the executives, become better interviewers, create a better candidate experience? I mean, that's amazing. Just to think that I think there's going to be a time that we just kind of sit back and we go, how in the hell, why did we do it that way for so long? That was so rudimentary and ineffective.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of, I think, some of the great satisfaction we get in the feedback from our customers, in that you're right, hiring managers love this. And it is one of those things where, for the first time, the implementation of a technology is making talent acquisition teams look amazing in organizations. And I say that we have one very large customer who, at the beginning of this year, they implemented Pillar through last year. And at the beginning of this year, they were heralded as one of the top 3 major impact projects across the whole organization for the first time ever. The first time sort of talent acquisition has been sort of heralded as sort of making a huge impact in the organization. And it's just really, very, very satisfying for us to be able to help talent acquisition teams step into, that sort of truly sort of strategic partnership that with hiring managers and adding that much value across the business.
No, that kind of makes my jaw drop, because TA is usually the whipping post of the organization. I mean, and I don't care industry, size of company, size of the team. It's just when people go, hey, I want to get into TA, what's one advice? And get thick skin. So I mean, the fact that they can bring in a tool like you guys and kind of elevate their practice and be seen I mean, wow, that's jaw dropping. So what are some of the roadblocks or things to consider when implementing any kind of interview intelligence, or AI for that matter, in HR?
Look, I think that it depends on the organization and the organization's attitudes. Obviously, some larger organizations don't want interviews to be recorded. For example, that can be a roadblock that people need to think about. And in those situations, we either help talent acquisition teams with conversations with their legal team and sort of explain that getting data and insights and being able to prove why you hired who you hired and why they're the best person is a good thing, rather than to be fearful of it. Or if it's a real blockage within an organization, start by implementing interview intelligence without interview recordings. You don't get some of the benefits on some of the time savings on write-ups and those sorts of things, but you do get the ability to implement a structured and consistent interview process and use that to make hires. As AI sort of councils pop up, the other roadblock is just sort of navigating that new world of which elements of AI is our company happy implementing at this stage of our evolution in leaning into AI as an organization. So I would say those are two big areas that we help enterprises with as we go through, and some of the roadblocks that come up. Other than that, across the board, it's a question of talent acquisition teams being time poor and having to focus on certain areas, and budget poor in some cases, and just focusing on where their dollars can make the biggest impact. And we do see the interview intelligence ranks right up there, but there are priorities for different organizations depending on the stage of them. So but I think you find that when applying any sort of new technology. So yeah, that would be they'd be the three things I'd highlight.
Those are three pretty big roadblocks to overcome, especially depending on the scale of the organization and its risk tolerance. So I do want to ask you a question. Being a CEO in HR tech and working with technology that is at the forefront, at the edge, if you had to describe your HR professional, the person that is over your people, what are some of the things that as you look into the future for where your company is going, what are some of the things that you're going to expect out of your people function? Because I think your answer is going to be a little bit different, because you are right at the cutting edge in the HR industry. So to me, I think your insight would be really impactful for those that are listening of how they should evolve.
I mean, some of the primary thing that I appreciate in that role is having someone that is super adaptable. It's a very, very fast changing environment right now. Mm-hmm. I don't foresee that slowing down at any point in the near future either. So I look for people that are ready and willing to embrace technology, embrace AI, people who have a certain level of data literacy. Because the more you embrace this, the more you need that sort of data literacy. The more you need to be able to run organizations based on data, and that's going to get more and more, I think, as we go through in the future. Someone who can get their head around sort of ethics in AI and making sure that we're doing the right thing in that as well, I think is really important. And then two other areas. One is just the self-motivation and self-drive to continue to learn. that sort of continuous learning mindset, I think is super, super important in HR right now. And then the ability to really master change management. Because in a world that's adapting so quickly, change is going to be continuous, and managing that change is going to be very, very important. So, so I think having someone that's adaptable, someone that's always learning, and someone that can really implement change, I think are three kind of key qualities from HR professionals now. For me in my organization.
I love that. I think those are great. I read somewhere a quote that I'm going to gank. It said that adaptability is the new currency. And I thought that was pretty profound, Yeah. All right, so let's get into some rapid fire. What is a book that changed your view of business and or HR?
The book that kind of had the biggest impact to me when I read it was actually, I think, probably just a classic, something that most people have read now, and that's Who by Jeff Smart. And just saw that when I started reading that as years ago in one of my leadership roles, the light bulb went on, and just we must be able to do talent acquisition better, using data, using machine learning, using AI. And then it was from that point, years later, where I actually sort of envisaged a way to do that. Actually, COVID was a big driver in that, where everything moved to Zoom and Teams, and we could actually see into interviews, and that was the light bulb moment that went on. But Who was a book that had a very big impact in taking kind of my experience in data and machine learning and applying that into talent acquisition.
That's hilarious. I've got a bookshelf right here to my left, and it's one of the books that is sitting right there.
Me too, just over there.
yeah, and I actually went through and automated that. That was one of the first little GPTs that I created, was taking that process. And now whenever we have a role that we need to create, that's the process that we go through, is finding out what are the competencies we're looking for, what are the behaviors we're looking for, how do we define success. And it's funny because whenever I work with people, they'll roll their eyes and go, oh God, here we go. But I can tell you that the quality of hire is completely different if you go through that process. So fantastic book.
I'd love to have a little go on your GPT there, Trent.
Well, I've got to update it a little bit because there's a kink in it that I can't figure out. So, but maybe I'll just give it over to you and let you fix it. Then all of us can benefit. So is there like a favorite podcast or a series that you listen to in business?
William Timcup and the Work Define team are doing some really interesting podcasts now, and sort of the network they're building is kind of interesting to watch, because there is so much new content, and that sort of like more micro sort of podcasts that are very, very tailored, that are coming onto that network, that I find that sort of fascinating. Something that I look at, and I look for relevance at the moment. So that's something I spend a lot of time listening to and looking at what's coming up. So
he's a good one.
Outside of this, Trent, I'll go with the Work Define network.
Well, William Tincup is one of my faves as well. He's on. I've got kind of 5 that I rotate through, and the audience knows because I've said this a couple of times, but I'm a weirdo. I listen to podcasts while I work out, but his is definitely up there with just fantastic content. And I always learn something. It's always kind of makes me stop and reframe a problem that I'm trying to solve. So if people want to find and engage with you, where can they do that?
Very simply, I'm always happy to give my email address out for people who want to connect with me on anything.
That's bold.
Mark@pillar.hr. Or LinkedIn is a great place where I spend a lot of time living in LinkedIn, and so if you just search up Mark Simpson and Pillar, then I come up in LinkedIn as well. Always happy to connect, and happy to help if I can be of help to anyone.
Well, and I've got to get a plug not just to you and your organization, but also your team. I've worked a lot with your team, and they are absolutely phenomenal. So if you're looking for ways to level up your career and learn new things, Pillar does a fantastic job with their webinar series, with their content that they put out. I always stop and I read it because there's always something that I can take away from it. So thank you to you and your team for not just going out and selling a product and fixing a problem within the interview process, but you all really give back to the community. So thank you for that. And I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that,
Love
Trent.
the work.
We have a fantastic team. If we if we didn't have a fantastic team running an interview intelligence platform, I'd kind of question our worth. But we do have a fantastic team. But one of our purposes is trying to help the market as much as we can. Trying to help the market in which we're providing services for, and we are truly aligned with the successes and the pains that talent acquisition go through, and we are always looking for ways to try and help advance people and help advance the market as much as we can, outside of the small part of it in which we play. So I appreciate those words. I appreciate that's come through. So a lot of work goes into that.
Absolutely. So I always like to offer guests a mic drop moment. So this can be advice. This can be, kind of a summary of the time that we've spent together. But if there was one line that someone listening to this would walk away and be able to remember from Mark Simpson, what would that be?
Well, look, I would love for people to leave this podcast to open up ChatGPT, and the next work thing they do, just try it. Try putting it in, try getting an answer, try running a process through it, just get out there and play, but immediately sort of leave this, get back when you get back to your desk, try and have a play, because I think you'll find that the world's a fascinating place if you're willing to experiment, and the more you do, I think the more you'll get back and more you get out of it. So when you get back to work, open GPT, put your next day's tasks through it, and see what comes out the other side.
I love it. And if you're listening and you want any kind of help, I do have a ton of content out there about GPTs, and also too, I have been becoming a huge fan of Google's Gemini and their gems. So, test out both of them, see which one you like the best, and just incorporate it in your daily routine. So, Mark, thank you again, and thank you to your team for helping us get together today. And I will put all of his contact info in the show notes. And Mark, thank you again. I appreciate it. And I will see everyone else next time.
Trent, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. And love the work you do, Trent. So really appreciate it.
All right. Same to you, sir. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
And that is a wrap on another episode of The Human Capitalist. Thank you so much for choosing to tune in and invest your time with me today. I hope that you walked away with some valuable insights and actionable strategies that you can maximize your greatest asset, and that's you. But hey, before you go, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that way you can stay in the know. The Human Capitalist movement begins with you. If you have some feedback, feel free to leave it. I'll read every comment. I want to make sure that the content that I am delivering is what you want to hear. If you want to connect further, you can find me at my link down below. I'd love to hear from you and continue this awesome conversation. Well, this is Trent Cotton, your human capitalist, and I'm going to sign off. But remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your human capital.